Ambassador Lee Hanna looked out the window of the human starship as it moved toward the giant space station called Nexus Prime. And she felt her heart beating fast because this was the most important day in human history. And she knew that everything they did here would change Earth forever. The station was huge beyond anything humans had ever built, and it looked like a metal city floating in space with millions of lights shining from its surface and ships of all shapes and sizes moving around, like tiny bugs around a bright lamp. And Hanna could see that some of those ships were bigger than entire Earth cities. Dr. Park Mina sat next to her, checking her datapad one more time and making sure all the information about human culture and science was ready to show the aliens. And she had spent 3 years learning about every alien species in the Galactic Council Empire, and she knew more about their customs than most humans knew about their own neighbors. Commander Kim Juno stood near the back of the ship checking his weapons, even though this was supposed to be a peaceful mission, because his job was to keep the diplomats safe, and he had trained for 15 years to be the best soldier Earth could send, and he did not trust aliens he had never met with the lives of his people. Captain Cho Yuna was flying the ship and talking to the alien traffic controllers who were telling her where to dock, and she was the best pilot on Earth and had flown through asteroid fields and solar storms, but she had never flown to meet aliens who could destroy her planet with a single order. The 4 humans had been chosen from millions of people who wanted this job, and they had trained together for 2 years, and they knew each other better than family. And they all knew that if they failed here, then Earth might never get another chance to join the galaxy. Peacefully, Hanna carried a small bag with gifts from Earth, including music from every culture and art from every continent, and samples of human food and technology that showed how creative and peaceful humans could be. And she hoped these gifts would show the aliens that humans deserved to be treated as equals. The ship docked with a soft bump, and the airlock opened with a hissing sound, and the 4 humans stepped into the alien station. And the first thing they noticed was how everything was built for creatures much taller than humans. And the ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness, and the walls were covered with symbols that hurt to look at. An alien creature walked toward them, and it looked like a tall, thin tree with too many arms, and its skin was blue-green like old metal. And when it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through broken glass, and it said, "Welcome to Nexus Prime," in words that their translation devices turned into something humans could understand. The alien led them through corridors filled with strange smells and sounds, and they passed hundreds of different alien creatures, and some looked like giant insects, and others looked like walking rocks, and some were just clouds of gas that moved through the air. And Hanna realized that humans were probably the strangest-looking creatures the aliens had ever seen. Were brought to a large room where 12 alien creatures sat on platforms that looked like thrones, and these were the council members who ruled the galaxy, and they looked down at the humans like humans might look down at insects. And the largest alien in the center was Council Prime Vextar, who had skin like black stone and eyes like burning stars. Vextar spoke in a voice that made the floor shake, and he said, "So these are the creatures from the small world called Earth, and they think they are ready to join civilized society." And several of the other council members made sounds that the translation devices said were laughter, but sounded more like metal being torn apart. Hanna stepped forward and bowed the way she had practiced, and she said, "Great Council Prime, we come from Earth with respect and friendship, and we bring gifts to show our peaceful intentions, and we hope to learn from your wisdom and share what knowledge we have." She opened her bag and showed them the music, and art and food and technology, and she explained how humans had stopped fighting wars on their own planet and had learned to work together and had developed science and art and philosophy. And she spoke for 20 minutes about everything good about humanity. When she finished, Vextar looked at the gifts like they were garbage, and he said, "These primitive trinkets mean nothing to us, and your species is barely above animals, and if you want to join our empire, you must first be purified." And he explained that purification meant changing human DNA and making humans into slaves who could only do simple jobs. Park Mina stepped forward and said with respect, "Council Prime humans have developed faster than light travel and advanced computers and medical technology that can cure diseases your empire still struggles with, and we have art and music that could enrich galactic culture, and we believe we can contribute as equals, not slaves." Council Prime Vextar stood up from his throne, and his eyes burned brighter, and he said equals, and the word came out like poison, And he said, no species has ever become equal with us by asking nicely. And he said, your species will submit to purification, or your world will be cleansed of life. And there is no third option. Commander Kim Juno felt his hand move toward his weapon, but he stopped himself because starting a fight here would mean war between Earth and the entire galaxy. And he looked at Captain Cho Yuna and saw that she was thinking the same thing, and they both knew they were outnumbered by billions to one. Hana tried to stay calm, and she said, surely we can find a compromise that honors both our peoples, and she said humans are willing to follow galactic laws and pay taxes and contribute to the empire, but we cannot accept slavery, and we ask for time to discuss this with our government. Vextar made a sound like thunder, and he said, there will be no discussion and no compromise. And he pointed at the humans with one of his long fingers, and he said, guards, arrest these creatures for refusing lawful orders and for contaminating our sacred chambers with their inferior genetics. Alien soldiers that looked like giant spiders came into the room, and they carried weapons that glowed with deadly energy. And Commander Kim Juno reached for his gun, but there were too many of them, and Captain Cho Yuna started to run toward the door. But more soldiers blocked her way, and Dr. Park Mina grabbed Hana's arm and said, we have to go now, but it was already too late. The spider soldiers surrounded the four humans, and their weapons made a humming sound that meant they were ready to kill. And Vextar said, take them to the detention center and prepare them for trial. And he said, let this be a lesson to any other primitive species that think they can bargain with their superiors, as the soldiers led them away. Hana looked back at the council chamber, and she saw the alien leaders laughing and making jokes about stupid humans who thought they deserved respect, and she realized that Earth had made a terrible mistake thinking these creatures could ever be reasoned with, and she wondered if her planet would ever know what happened to their diplomatic mission. The prison cell was a metal box with no windows and no furniture, and the four humans sat on the cold floor in darkness, listening to strange sounds coming through the walls, and they had been there for 6 days without knowing what was happening to them, or if Earth even knew they were captured. Commander Kim Juno had tried to break down the door on the first day, but it was made of some metal stronger than anything on Earth, and when he hit it, his hand started bleeding, and the door did not even get a scratch. And Captain Cho Yuna had tried to find weak spots in the walls, but every part of the cell was built to hold prisoners who were much stronger than humans. Dr. Park Mina spent her time trying to understand the alien voices she could hear in the corridors, and she had learned some of their language during her preparation for the mission. And what she heard made her stomach feel sick because the aliens were talking about them like they were animals in a zoo and making jokes about how weak and stupid humans were. Ambassador Lee Hana tried to stay hopeful, and she told the others that Earth would find a way to negotiate their release. And she said their government had smart people who would figure out how to deal with the Galactic Council, but deep inside she was starting to understand that these aliens did not think of humans as people at all. On the 7th day, the cell door opened with a loud crash, and 6 spider soldiers came in with their glowing weapons, and behind them was an alien that looked like a walking skeleton covered in purple skin, and it spoke in a voice like grinding metal, and said, the trial will begin now, and you will be judged for your crimes against the Empire. They were dragged through corridors filled with aliens who stopped to stare at them and point and make sounds that seemed like laughter, and Hana realized they were being displayed like freaks in a circus, and some of the aliens threw things at them, and others took pictures with devices that flashed bright lights. The trial room was enormous with thousands of aliens sitting in rows like a stadium, and at the front was a platform where 5 alien judges sat behind a tall desk, and the judges looked like different kinds of monsters from human nightmares, and they all stared down at the 4 humans with eyes that showed no kindness or mercy. The lead judge was taller than the others and had skin like old leather, and when it spoke, its voice echoed through the room, and it said, these creatures stand accused of refusing purification orders and contaminating sacred council chambers and insulting the dignity of the Empire. And it said the penalty for these crimes is death. A prosecutor that looked like a giant, worm covered in slime, stood up and began speaking in the alien language, and the humans could not understand most of what it said, because their translation devices had been taken away, but they could tell from the tone that it was describing them as dangerous criminals who threatened galactic peace. Hana tried to stand up and speak, but the guards pushed her back down, and when she tried to explain that they were peaceful diplomats, one of the judges made a sound like breaking glass and said, "Silence, inferior creature," and it said, "Your kind has no right to speak in this court." The trial lasted 4 hours, and the humans were never allowed to defend themselves or explain their actions, and they could not understand the charges against them, and no evidence was presented except the fact that they had refused to become slaves. And when it was over, the lead judge stood up and said guilty on all charges. The crowd of aliens cheered and made horrible sounds, and some of them started chanting words that sounded like death. Death, death. And the lead judge raised one of its arms and said, "The sentence is death by hanging, and it will be carried out in the public square tomorrow at the noon hour for all to see." That night, in their cell, the 4 humans held each other and tried to stay brave, but they all knew they were going to die far from home, and their families would never know what happened to them, and Earth would never know that the Galactic Council was full of monsters who enjoyed killing innocent people. Dr. Park Mina said she was sorry for not learning more about alien psychology, and Commander Kim Juno said he was sorry for not finding a way to protect them, and Captain Cho Yuna said she was sorry for not flying them away faster, and Ambassador Lee Hana said none of it was their fault, because they had done everything right, but they were dealing with creatures who had no honor. The next morning, the guards came for them, and they were taken to a large square in the center of the station where thousands of aliens had gathered like it was a festival. And there were vendors selling food and drinks and souvenirs and children, aliens running around playing games, and everyone seemed excited to watch humans. 2 wooden platforms had been built in the center of the square, and each platform had a rope hanging from a metal beam. And Hana saw that the ropes were too short for humans, and she realized the aliens had built the gallows wrong on purpose, so the humans would suffer longer before they died. Council Prime Vextar stood on a balcony above the square, and he spoke to the crowd, and his voice was amplified so everyone could hear, and he said, "Today, we show the galaxy what happens to inferior species who think they can bargain with their superiors," and he said, "Let this be a lesson to any world that thinks it can resist the Empire." The guards separated the 4 humans, and Hana saw that only she and Dr. Park Mina were being taken to the platforms, and Commander Kim Juno and Captain Cho Yuna were being held back, and she realized the aliens were going to make the men watch their friends die first, and then kill them later. Cameras were recording everything, and Hana knew the aliens were going to broadcast this across the galaxy to show other species what happened to rebels, and she tried to stand tall and look brave, because she did not want to give the aliens the satisfaction of seeing her break down. Dr. Park Mina looked at her and said, "Remember, we represent all of humanity, and we need to show them that humans do not beg for mercy from monsters." And Hana nodded and said, "Earth will remember us, and someday they will make these creatures pay for what they have done." Executioner was a massive alien that looked like a cross between a bear and a lizard, and it put the ropes around their necks with hands that were surprisingly gentle, and Hana wondered if this creature felt any guilt about killing innocent people, or if it was just another job. Vextar raised his arm and the crowd went silent, and he said any last words from the inferior creatures, and Hana looked up at him and said, "Humanity will never forget this day, and we will never forgive." And Dr. Park Mina said, "Our deaths will be the beginning of your end." Vextar laughed and said brave words from dead creatures, and he dropped his arm, and the platforms fell away, and Hana felt the rope bite into her neck, and she saw Dr. Park Mina kicking and struggling next to her, and she heard Commander Kim Juno screaming their names and Captain Cho Yuna crying, and the crowd of aliens cheering like they were watching a sports game. The cameras kept recording as the 2 human women died slowly and painfully, while thousands of aliens celebrated. And when it was over, Vextar announced that the remaining 2 humans would be kept as specimens for scientific study, and he said this recording would be sent to Earth as a warning of what would happen if they did not surrender. Far away on Earth, billions of humans watched the broadcast and saw their representatives murdered by laughing monsters, and President Lim Sora stood in her office with tears in her eyes and her hands shaking with rage, and she said, quietly, "They want to see what humans are capable of." And then she looked at her military advisors and said, "They are about to find out." President Lim Sora stood before the cameras in her office, and her face was calm, but her eyes burned with a cold fire that every human watching could feel in their bones. and she spoke in a quiet voice that somehow carried more power than any shout. And she said, "My fellow humans, we have seen evil today, and evil has seen us." She held up a picture of Ambassador Lee Hanna and Dr. Park Mina taken during their training, and she said these women went to the stars, carrying our hopes for peace and friendship, and they were murdered by creatures who think strength gives them the right to kill the innocent, and she said their deaths will not be forgotten, and they will not go unanswered. Behind her stood Admiral Song Kira and General Bei Dano and Director Yoon Tae, and they all wore expressions that would have frightened the aliens if they could have seen them. And President Sora said, "For too long, we have hidden our true capabilities from the galaxy because we hoped never to need them. But today, that changes." She walked to a window that showed Earth spinning slowly in space, and she said, "The Galactic Council has given us 30 days to surrender or face destruction." And she turned back to the camera and said, "They will have their answer in 30 days, but it will not be the answer. They expect." Admiral Song Kira stepped forward and said, "Citizens of Earth, for 20 years, we have been building ships and weapons in secret facilities around our solar system, and we have technologies that make alien science look like stone tools, and we have been preparing for this day since we first detected alien signals." She activated a holographic display that showed hundreds of sleek warships hidden in asteroid bases and moon colonies and underwater facilities, and she said these ships can travel faster than alien vessels and strike without being detected, and they carry weapons that can destroy planets. General Bei Dano spoke next, and his voice was like iron, and he said, "Every military base on Earth has been placed on war alert, and our factories are converting to weapons production, and volunteers are joining our forces faster than we can process them." And he said the entire human race is united in this fight. Director Yoon Tae showed satellite images of alien facilities throughout the galaxy, and she said our intelligence agents have been mapping every alien world and military base for 15 years, and we know their weaknesses and their secrets, and we know exactly how to hurt them where it matters most. President Sora returned to the podium and said the aliens made one critical mistake when they chose to murder our people instead of negotiating, and she said they revealed that they are not a civilization but a gang of bullies who rule through fear and violence, and she said, "Humanity has dealt with bullies before." She paused and looked directly into the camera and said, "We will rescue Commander Kim Juno and Captain Cho Yuna, and we will make the aliens pay for every moment of suffering they have caused." And she said, "By the time we are finished, the galaxy will be free of the Galactic Council forever." Within hours of the broadcast, every human nation had pledged their full support and resources to the war effort, and factories that had been making cars and computers started making weapons and spaceships, and millions of people lined up at recruitment centers to join the military. Admiral Song Kira met with her fleet commanders in a secret base hidden inside an asteroid, and she showed them plans for Operation Ghost Fleet. And she said our ships will strike alien targets across the galaxy simultaneously, and they will never see us coming until it is too late. The human warships were unlike anything in the galaxy, and they used technology that the aliens did not understand and could not detect, and they could phase through energy shields, and their weapons adapted to enemy defenses in real time, and they moved through space like shadows. General Bei Dano coordinated with resistance groups on alien slave worlds, and he said humans are not the only species that hate the Galactic Council, and he said when we begin our attacks, these enslaved peoples will rise up and fight for their freedom. Director Yoon Tae activated sleeper agents who had been living on alien worlds for years, pretending to be traders and researchers, and she said these agents will sabotage alien infrastructure and communications, and the aliens will be blind and deaf when we strike. The first mission was to rescue the 2 surviving humans from the alien prison, and Admiral Song Kira personally led a strike force of 12 ghost ships toward Nexus Prime, and they traveled through hyperspace using routes that alien sensors could not detect. The prison where Commander Kim Juno and Captain Cho Yuna were being held was the most secure facility in the galaxy, and it had never been breached in 1,000 years, and it was protected by energy shields and automated defenses and an entire fleet of alien warships. But the human ships approached using stealth technology that made them invisible to alien sensors, and they passed through the shields like they were not there, and they landed inside the prison without triggering a single alarm. Commander Kim Juno and Captain Cho Yuna had been tortured and experimented on for weeks, and they were weak and sick, but they were alive. and when they saw human soldiers coming to rescue them, they cried with relief and joy. The rescue team moved through the prison like ghosts, and they freed hundreds of other prisoners from different species, and they planted explosives that would destroy the facility after they left, and they were gone before the aliens even knew they had been there. As the human ships escaped into hyperspace, the prison exploded behind them and alarms started ringing throughout Nexus Prime and Council. Prime Vextar screamed with rage when he learned that the humans had made him look like a fool in front of the entire galaxy. The rescued prisoners told the humans about other facilities where aliens tortured and enslaved innocent beings, and they provided information about alien military weaknesses, and they begged to join the human war effort against their former captors. Admiral Song Kira broadcast a message to every alien world, and she said the Galactic Council claimed humans were inferior, but humans just rescued prisoners from your most secure facility without losing a single soldier. And she said this is only the beginning. On Earth, people celebrated in the streets when they learned their people had been rescued. But President Lim Sora reminded them that the war was just starting, and she said, "We have shown the aliens that we can strike them anywhere at any time, and now they know they are not safe." The aliens tried to respond by sending warships to attack Earth, but the human defense fleet was waiting for them, and the alien ships were destroyed before they could fire a single shot, and not one alien survived to report what had happened. Director Yoon Tae released recordings of alien leaders discussing their plans to enslave and murder other species, and these recordings were broadcast to every world in the galaxy. And suddenly the aliens found themselves facing rebellions on hundreds of planets. General Bae Dano began coordinating attacks on alien supply lines and communication networks, and within days, the Galactic Council had lost contact with half of their territory, and they were fighting desperate battles just to maintain control of their core worlds. The aliens tried to negotiate, but President Sora refused to talk to them, and she said, "You showed us what happens to those who trust you," and she said the only negotiation we will accept is your complete surrender and the trial of everyone responsible for murdering our people. Council. Prime Vextar appeared on galactic television, and his voice shook with fear and rage, and he said the humans are terrorists who threaten galactic civilization, and he called on all loyal species to join the fight against humanity. But the other species had seen the execution of the human diplomats, and they had heard the stories of alien cruelty, and they refused to fight for the Council, and some of them began helping the humans instead. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, because humans did not fight like other species, and they did not follow the rules that had governed warfare for thousands of years, and they showed no mercy to those who had murdered their diplomats. Admiral Song Kira divided her fleet into hundreds of small groups, and each group struck different targets across the galaxy, and the aliens could never predict where humans would attack next, and they found themselves defending everything and protecting nothing. The human ships appeared without warning at alien military bases and destroyed them completely, and then vanished before reinforcements could arrive, and the aliens began to fear the darkness of space because death could come from any direction at any moment. General Bae Dano coordinated with freed slaves on alien worlds, and he taught them how to make weapons from common materials and how to sabotage alien infrastructure, and suddenly the aliens found enemies inside their own cities and homes. Director Yoon Tae unleashed computer viruses that spread through alien networks like fire, through dry grass, and these viruses destroyed military communications and crashed economic systems and turned alien robots against their masters. But the humans did not just attack military targets, and they began striking at everything that made the Galactic Council powerful, and they destroyed trade routes and manufacturing centers and government buildings, and alien leaders found themselves isolated and helpless. Commander Kim Juno and Captain Cho Yuna had recovered from their torture, and they demanded to be allowed to fight, and they led special operations teams that hunted down the aliens who had participated in the execution of their friends. The first target was Military Commander Quindal, who had overseen the trial and execution, and Captain Cho Yuna tracked him to his fortress on a moon orbiting the alien homeworld, and she led a team of 50 human soldiers in an assault that lasted 6 hours. The fortress was supposed to be impregnable, and it was defended by thousands of alien soldiers and energy weapons that could melt through steel, but the humans used tactics that the aliens had never seen before, and they fought with a fury that terrified their enemies. Quindal tried to escape when he realized his forces were losing, but Commander Kim Juno was waiting for him, and when the alien begged for mercy, Kim Juno showed him a picture of Ambassador Lee Hana and Dr. Park Mina, and said these women asked for mercy too. The alien died slowly and painfully, and his death was broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to other war criminals, and humans announced that every alien who had participated in the execution would be hunted down and killed. The psychological effect of these targeted assassinations was devastating, and alien leaders began turning on each other, and many tried to flee to distant galaxies, but human ships were faster and human agents were everywhere, and there was nowhere to hide. On the planet Vega Prime, where millions of different species had been enslaved for centuries, the slaves rose up when human weapons were smuggled to them, and they fought there. Alien masters with tools and kitchen knives and bare hands. The battle for Vega Prime lasted 3 weeks, and the slaves were outnumbered 10-1, but they fought with the desperation of beings who had nothing left to lose, and they were supported by human advisors who taught them military tactics. When the battle was over, the alien garrison was dead, and the slaves were free, and they erected a statue of Ambassador Lee Hana and Dr. Park Mina in the center of their capital city, and they swore loyalty to the human cause. Similar uprisings began on hundreds of worlds as news of the liberation spread, and the Galactic Council found itself fighting on thousands of fronts simultaneously, and their military forces were stretched beyond breaking point. The aliens tried to respond by threatening to destroy entire planets, but humans had anticipated this, and Director Yoon Tae had planted agents in alien weapon facilities, and when the aliens tried to use planet-killer weapons, they exploded. In their own ship's Admiral Song, Kira began the siege of Nexus Prime, and she surrounded the massive station with a fleet of ghost ships that the aliens could not detect or target, and she cut off all supply lines and communications. The siege lasted 3 months, and during this time the aliens inside the station began to starve and fight among themselves, and many tried to surrender, but the humans refused to accept surrender from anyone who had supported the Execution Council. Prime Vextar sent desperate messages to the human fleet offering to negotiate and promising to return all prisoners and pay any compensation demanded, but Admiral Song Kira responded by showing him the recording of the execution. She said, "You had your chance to negotiate when our diplomats came in peace, and you chose to murder them instead." And she said, "Now, you will learn what humans do to creatures who kill the innocent." The other members of the Galactic Council began abandoning Nexus Prime and fleeing to their homeworlds, but human ships were waiting for them, and one by one they were captured or killed, and their governments collapsed without leadership. Earth, billions of people watched the war unfold on their screens, and they saw alien cities burning and alien fleets destroyed, and former slaves celebrating their freedom, and they felt pride and satisfaction, but also a deep sadness for what their species had become. President Lim Sora addressed the nation again, and she said, "War changes everyone who fights it, and we have done terrible things in the name of justice." And she said, "But we must finish what we started, because the galaxy must be made safe for peaceful species." She announced that humans would not stop fighting until every member of the Galactic Council was dead or captured, and every slave world was free, and every species had the right to determine their own destiny. The final battle came when human forces surrounded the alien homeworld and demanded the unconditional surrender of all remaining council members, and when the aliens refused, Admiral Song Kira ordered the bombardment to begin. But before the weapons could fire, a signal came from the planet's surface, and Council Prime Vextar appeared on the screen, and his proud bearing was gone, and he looked old and broken, and he said, "Enough. We surrender." General Baydano landed on the planet with an army of human soldiers and former slaves who had joined the war, and they marched through the alien capital, while terrified citizens watched from their windows. The remaining council members were arrested and charged with crimes against sentient beings, and they were put on trial in the same courtroom where they had condemned the human diplomats to death. Director Yuntai presented evidence of the aliens' crimes spanning thousands of years, and she showed recordings of executions and torture and enslavement, and the judges were representatives from every species the aliens had oppressed. The trials lasted 6 months, and every day new evidence was presented of alien cruelty and murder. And when they were over, most of the council members were sentenced to death, and the rest were sentenced to life in prison. Vextar was the last to be tried. And when he was found guilty, the judge asked if he had any final words, and he looked at the humans in the courtroom and said, "You have become the very monsters you sought to destroy." President Lim. Sora stood up and said, "We became what we needed to become, to stop you." And she said, "History will judge whether we were right, but today justice is served for Ambassador Lee Hana and Dr. Park Mina." The execution of Council Prime Vextar took place in the same square where Ambassador Lee Hana and Dr. Park Mina had been murdered, and this time it was aliens who watched in silence as justice was served, and humans who controlled the cameras that broadcast the event across the galaxy. President Lim Sora stood on the platform where the alien leader had once gloated over human deaths, and she spoke to the gathered crowd of freed slaves and former alien citizens, and she said, "Today marks the end of an empire built on cruelty and the beginning of something better." When Vextar died, the last symbol of the old order died with him, and across the galaxy, former slave species celebrated their freedom, while former alien overlords struggled to accept their new reality as equals rather than masters. But President Sora knew that destroying the old system was easier than building a new one, and she called together representatives from every species to create something that had never existed before in galactic history, which was a government based on equality and justice rather than fear and oppression. The meeting took place on a neutral world that had never been part of the Galactic Council, and for 6 months delegates argued and debated and sometimes fought as they tried to create laws that would protect everyone. Admiral Song Kira had become the most famous human in the galaxy, and former slaves called her the Liberator, while former alien officials called her the Destroyer, and she was offered the position of Supreme Military Commander of the new government, but she refused. She said, "Humans have seen what happens when one species controls the galaxy, and we will not make the same mistake." And she said the military must serve all species equally and be commanded by representatives from different worlds. General Baidano created the Galactic Defense Academy, where soldiers from every species learned to work together, and he taught them that their job was to protect the innocent rather than serve the powerful. And he said never again would the military be used to oppress the weak. Director Yuntai established the Interspecies Intelligence Service, and its mission was to prevent any single species or group from gaining too much power, and to watch for signs that someone might try to recreate the old empire. Commander Kim Juno and Captain Cho Yuna returned to Earth as heroes, but they carried scars from their imprisonment that would never fully heal, and they spent their time helping other former prisoners recover from their trauma. The new government was called the Free Species Alliance, and its founding principle was that every sentient being had the right to life and liberty and self-determination, and no species could claim superiority over another. At the spot where the human diplomats had been executed, a massive memorial was built, and it became a place of pilgrimage for beings from across the galaxy who came to remember the price of freedom and the consequences of treating others as inferior. The memorial was made of black stone, and it showed the faces of Ambassador Lee Hana and Dr. Park Mina, and beneath their names were the words, "They came in peace and died for justice, and their sacrifice freed the galaxy every year on the anniversary of their deaths." Representatives from every world gathered at the memorial, and President Lim Sora gave a speech called the Never Again Address, where she reminded the galaxy of the importance of protecting the innocent. She said these two women believed that different species could live together in peace and friendship, and they died because they refused to accept that some beings are born to be slaves, and she said their dream did not die with them. Economic reconstruction of the galaxy took decades because the alien empire had been built on slave labor, and when the slaves were freed, entire industries collapsed overnight. But humans shared their technology freely with other species, and they taught former slaves how to build their own cities and governments and economies, and they never asked for payment or control in return. Some former alien officials tried to start new empires on the edges of the galaxy, but they were stopped by joint forces of humans and former slaves who had learned that freedom required constant vigilance. The children of former slaves grew up free, and they learned the history of the old empire, and they swore that they would never allow such cruelty to return, and they formed organizations dedicated to protecting the rights of all sentient beings. Commander Kim Juno became the director of the Memorial Foundation, and he traveled to schools across the galaxy, teaching young beings about the importance of standing up to bullies and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Captain Cho Yuna designed new ships for the Alliance fleet, and these ships were built for exploration and peacekeeping rather than conquest, and they carried scientists and diplomats as well as soldiers. 20 years after the war ended, President Lim Sora visited Nexus Prime, which had been converted from a symbol of oppression into a center of learning and culture, where beings from every species came to study and share knowledge. She walked through the corridors where human diplomats had once been dragged to their trial, and she saw alien and human and formerly enslaved children playing together and learning from teachers of every species. In the council chamber, where the humans had been condemned to death, there was now a school where young beings learned about justice and equality, and the importance of treating others with respect, regardless of their species or appearance. The old alien throne room had been turned into a museum, and visitors could see recordings of the trial and execution and the war that followed, and they could learn about the dangers of prejudice and hatred. President Sora was now an old woman, and she knew she would not live much longer, but she was satisfied with what humanity had accomplished, and she believed the galaxy was safer and more just than it had ever been. On her final visit to the memorial, she placed flowers at the base of the statue, and she spoke quietly to the images of the two women whose deaths had changed everything. She said, "Hana and Mina, your sacrifice was not in vain." And she said, "The galaxy you dreamed of exists now, and children of every species grow up free because you were brave enough to refuse to kneel to monsters." As she walked away from the memorial, a group of young beings from different worlds were gathered around a teacher who was telling them the story of the human diplomats and the war that followed. One of the children asked if humans were the good guys or the bad guys, and the teacher thought for a moment and said, "Humans were people who did what they believed was right, even when it was difficult and painful." The teacher said, "The lesson of this story is not that one species is better than another, but that everyone has the responsibility to protect the innocent and stand up to those who abuse their power." That night, President Sora gave her final speech to the Alliance Council, and she said humanity came to the stars seeking friendship and found only cruelty. And she said, "But from that cruelty we learned that freedom is not given, it is taken, and it must be defended every day." She said the galaxy will face new challenges and new threats, and there will always be those who seek power over others. And she said, "But as long as free beings remember the lesson of Ambassador Lee Hana and Dr. Park Mina, the forces of oppression will never again rule the stars." The speech ended with the words that had become the motto of the Free Species Alliance, and every being in the galaxy knew them by heart, and they were carved into the memorial in letters that could be seen from space. They asked what humans were capable of, and the galaxy will never forget. The answer